All right, so hello everyone today, and thank you for joining us. We'll be getting started with today's webinar, but before we begin, if you'd like to access any accessibility features today, please take a moment to activate to use the closed captions button on the bottom of your Zoom window with the CC button on the toolbar. Uh, Today's webinar also features ASL, American Sign Language Interpretation for Spoken English. That's today provided by Valerie and Jordan from Maple Communications Canada and sponsored by RBC. We'll just take a brief moment to pause so that anyone who needs those features can turn those on. So this learning opportunity today is hosted by the Inclusive Workplace and Supply Council of Canada, or IWSCC. My name is Alex Duerksen, and as the IWSCC's Community Development Manager, I'm pleased to welcome you all here today. To describe myself, I'm a white man with brown hair that falls about chin length and currently somewhat scraggly brown beard. I wear blue round framed glasses, and today I'm wearing a warm red sweater. As Canada's national certifying body for disabled-owned and veteran-owned businesses, IWSCC works with businesses across Canada. Today, I'm joining you from Barrie, Ontario, and I'm happy to acknowledge that Barrie rests on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy, as well as the Huron-Wendat Nation, who occupied these lands up to the middle of the 17th century. Now, without any further delay, I'd like to pass things off to today's guest educator that you've all registered to learn from. Our guest today is a neurodivergent educator, consultant, artist, writer, and librarian, nationally recognized for their advocacy and library work for teens. Joining us today from the Kootenays, British Columbia, to share their expertise and their personal experience, please everyone give a warm virtual welcome to Jenine Lillian. Jenine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Alex, and everyone behind the scenes. Thank you, especially our ASL interpreters. My name is Jenine. My pronouns are Jenine, they, them. I am wearing a bright green shirt and a big smile. I have bold black and blue glasses and extremely short hair, but not shaved. So very happy to be here with you all today. I wanted to let you know a couple of things to expect. First of all, the way that the format of the Zoom event is structured, you'll notice that there's no ability to unmute or to show your camera. So take time to revel in the glory and the refuge that is not having to have your camera on. We'll talk about that today as well. And then there is a Q&A feature, and there's also the chat has been enabled. So along the way today, it's my hope that you hear some things that are very curious, that are surprising, that are prompting you to ask further questions or possibly even a new discovery. And please, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. I won't be looking at that at this time, but I will at the end of the presentation. Also, I want you to be able to be here fully. And as such, since we know we're going to cover lots of different things, instead of holding your questions at top of mind throughout the entirety of what we cover today, and thus not being able to really engage with the moment-to-moment learning, go ahead and add those questions to the Q&A, and my assistant and co-pilot today, Alex, will help us make sure that we get to as many of those at the end that we can. What else do I want to let you know? Basically, it is my great honor and privilege to be here today. And I know that in our audience, we have a very big mix of folks who are employers, folks who are business owners, entrepreneurs, folks who are students, parents, community members, and probably a lot of folks who are a bit neurodiversity curious. So it's my hope today to cover sort of the overall beginning conversation for each and every one of you, such that you have enough new and valid information to move forward to your next steps in your discovery. So without further ado, here we are, navigating neurodiversity, personal insights, and professional perspectives. So Alex did a brief introduction of me, and I'd like to introduce myself to you. Uh, I'm known for saying, "Hi, I'm Jenine." That's kind of my well-worn line throughout life, and it's actually um, one of my masking personas that allow me to connect with people and to be stepping out of my comfort zone and to engage on the turf that is commonality. So the sentences here, "I'm Jenine and I'm autistic," these have both been true for the entirety of my existence. However, the last sentence, "I'm autistic," isn't one that I knew or spoke until a little bit less than a year ago. So you might have been noticing on the marketing materials or the newsletters that it said hashtag actually autistic on the descriptor of this presentation. And the distinction of that is that hashtag actually autistic is supposed to be reserved for those of us who not only have lived experience, but formal assessment and formal diagnosis. And we'll talk a little bit later about the multiple barriers to achieving that, and how if you have that, you may still not disclose it to anyone. So I'm Jenine. I'm currently 52 years old, and all the things that Alex said about me earlier are true. I am very much autistic and didn't know until recently. So the interesting thing to me is how much my Jenine things about me fell squarely within the autistic domain. And having lived my whole life not knowing that, they just became sort of my quirks or things that other people found interesting or challenging, or endearing or difficult about me. So that's my hope today, to share with you some of that perspective, such that if you or someone you love is navigating the world of neurodiversity, that you feel a bit of comfort and also a bit of pride in this invisible disability. So I'd like to set the stage. Maya Angelou has many wonderful quotes and writings for all of us that are inspiring and that are heartfelt. But I wanted to put this one front and center for us today, to invite you and also implore you. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. So a lot of us have a strong reaction to this statement because we feel instantly the weight and the sadness of not being believed. Maybe not even the first time, but the 10th time, the 100th time. And especially when you're navigating neurodiversity, self-advocacy is something that is difficult and vital, and you'll never not do it. I can't tell you how many times a day I ask for something that I need. And it's really a support, and it's really a respect. And it's so challenging because in social situations, which are any situations when we're not utterly alone, it can be very tricky to be taken as your word and to be taken as having positive intentions and reasonable requests. So I just want to invite you to really feel the people in your life who do believe you the first time, and to engage in this material today, whether you're watching on the recorded video session or if you're here live, so that you can find ways to facilitate that both from your own perspective and to encourage others to do that for you. So one of the things that I really like to let people know is that we're all the same. And we are all human beings. We are all embodied. And all of these things that I'm about to read here for you today are universal truths, right? So no matter where you are in the world, no matter where you come from, no matter where you're going, these things are all true about all humans. So we're all the same. You are not alone. You are loved and you love. Your authentic self longs to be seen, heard, and valued. You have your own dreams, fears, desires, strengths, weaknesses, sensitivities, goals, learning style, perspective, and unique contribution to make wherever you go. And now that I've told you that we're all the same, here I'm going to tell you that we're all very different at the same time. So this is, again, another list of things that are universally true for all humans, regardless of where you are, where you come from, where you're going. We're all different. You have preferences for physical, emotional, and mental stimulation. You have special interests, hobbies, skills, and abilities. You have ways of expressing your thoughts and feelings. You enjoy being recognized, included, and appreciated in certain ways. And you have your own dreams, fears, desires, strengths, weaknesses, sensitivities, goals, learning style, perspective, and unique contribution to make wherever you go. So, 5 important things for today, starting from that common foundation, knowing that we are all the same and we're all different. And this is so much the way that life is, right? We have so many feelings and so many thoughts and so many experiences all at the same time. But today I'm going to give you 5 important things. 1, definitions. What neurodiversity is and what it's not. 2, how neurodiversity looks, how it shows up in life and at work. As we know, life and work are not that different because we're whole selves living whole and complete lives every day. 3, why neurodiversity matters, emerging discoveries and stories of experiences. 4, how to support neurodivergent folks, increasing awareness and reducing stigma. And 5, what you are wondering about. We're going to have a very robust question and answer session. We're going to get to as many as we can. And I'm also going to give you resources and offer connection to each and every one of you. So again, you don't have to hold those questions throughout the whole time. You can put them in the Q&A feature, and that will help Alex be able to quickly go through the queue at the end. And you'll also have my information. You can reach out at any time. Okay, so here we go. Neurodiversity. What is neurodiversity? So much like biodiversity, neurodiversity refers to the natural variations in how each brain processes and interprets information differently. So for example, you could say the human race exhibits neurodiversity in that no 2 human brains are alike. And this should be seen as a wonderful thing and an essential thing, not a bad thing or a biased thing. Now, notice that I said should. So we're going to talk a lot today, and we're going to use language that is what the current language is. I don't love the current language. I'm pretty sure you also don't love the current language, but we have to swim around and work within it until it shifts. And it is definitely shifting. Neurodivergent, often written as ND, describes an individual with cognitive differences. So for example, you could say, I attended a webinar today and the presenter was neurodivergent. They are autistic. And neurotypical, often written as NT, describes an individual with a brain that functions in a typical way, I'm putting that in quotes, that more neatly fits into, also in quotes, mainstream society. Now, a quick note on this. There are a great number of people who say that they are neurotypical because of the stigma and the difficulty of navigating the neurotypical biased world as a neurodivergent individual. So I have a number of people in my life, and I work with an organization sometimes, and their entire office team is neurodivergent, but none of them wants to be identified that way. And so we also need to respect that we're all standing in our own situation, and we may or may not want to know. I have a number of friends, when I started doing this consulting and education, they said, I don't want to know. I know you could tell me and you could give me information, but I don't want to know. So we have to respect that. And also, please note that every single person practices masking, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But just because a person can pass as neurotypical, or even can pass as neurodivergent, it doesn't mean that they are. So we can think in terms of years and years ago when there was a far greater stigma about being gay or lesbian or other in society. And so people would, quote unquote, pass as the mainstream status in order to avoid the stigma and the maltreatment. So neurotypical, you could use in a sentence. You could say, through all Janine's life, they thought they were neurotypical because they were told that they weren't autistic or anything else. And now they've learned that that wasn't the case. And then neurodiverse is a term used to describe a group of people who are neurodivergent. So now we've gone from the sort of very big umbrella to a smaller umbrella. So you could use neurodiverse in a sentence in a way that is something like, the entirety of the human race has always been and will always be neurodiverse. So this is a great quote from Nick Walker, who is a neurodivergent person and educator. Neurodiversity is a natural, healthy, and important form of human biodiversity, a fundamental and vital characteristic of the human species, a crucial source of evolutionary and creative potential. You may have noticed that the term neurodiversity has been popping up quite a lot lately, as has anxiety and overwhelmed. And so it's really just an indicator of the current status of our society when these words start to kind of be on trend. I never want to be on trend, but I find myself in a domain at the moment where people are saying like, oh, I think I know what that word means. And then when I ask them what they think it means, it turns out that it's not what they think it means. So we're really going to be using this language and then also seeing where it falls short. And one of the things I want to convey to you today as well is this piece at the end here of what Nick Walker says, that this is a crucial source of evolutionary and creative potential. A lot of the times when you're wondering if you are, or someone you love is, or might be, or you have an employee that's asking for some support and you don't know how to support them because you haven't encountered this explicitly yet, there can be a lot of negative things about it. And the messages from society to those of us who are neurodivergent certainly are primarily negative. And so I want to give us some positivity and some hope today. It is incredibly powerful to recognize the creative and energetic contributions of the neurodivergent mind. So again, talking about language, and we're also going to talk about numbers. So some examples of neurodiversity. And on this slide, I will invite you to type in the chat if you'd like. In a moment, I'm going to ask you a prompt question. So an estimated 1 in 5 adults in North America are neurodivergent. Now, that number is low. Why is that number low? Well, there are multiple barriers to becoming formally assessed, to accessing information, resources, and services to be formally assessed. Then there are barriers to getting, quote unquote, the true and real diagnosis. So that's a challenge, full stop. And then the further you break it down to older women, women at all, anyone who's from a marginalized community, the statistics become much more difficult that you'll actually make it all the way through the funnel to the source of support that you require. We also know that number is low because a number of people who do know that they are neurodivergent, they have the formal assessment, the formal diagnosis, they don't want to disclose. They don't want to tell anyone, especially their employers. We'll talk about a little bit more why that is. And a lot of it is that negative messaging, that negative interpretation. And so we don't really have an accurate number. I can tell you that that number is very low. Hopefully, as we move forward with this change that we've seen starting and it's rolling forward, including all of us here today, hopefully that number will become more accurate. I had to give you something to give you a starting point, which is there are a lot of people, there are a lot of adults. And so having said that, you may have heard of some of the conditions I'm about to read on this list, and note that I'm using the word conditions. I don't love it. It's what we have to work with. But you likely know someone with one or more of these: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, attention deficit disorder, autism spectrum disorder, otherwise known as autism, bipolar disorder, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, epilepsy, obsessive compulsive disorder, or Tourette syndrome. Now, this is not a complete list, but these are sort of the more commonly diagnosed and recognized in North America, especially for adults. And one of the things that I'd like you to type in the chat, if you feel up to it, is when you see this list or hear this list, what do you think about it? Imagine that you or someone you love is in front of a clinician and they say, "Hey, you or someone you love, I think that this," fill in the blank with whichever one you'd like to use on this list, uh, "this might be what you're dealing with. Um, I'm going to give you a pamphlet or encourage you to get information to find some information and resources and step forward." So Alex, would you mind just reading out some of those things?
Yeah, so our first suggestion is labels,
Yes, these
medicalized
are labels. Yep.
terms.
Yep. Just shout them out as they come in if anybody's typed anything. And I'll add some that I've heard before when I've asked this question if we don't have a lot of them. So yeah, these are labels. And they're necessarily such, right? We need some language in order to say this is this, and here's, we have to have it. But we don't have like positive language, right? They seem pretty negative. I think if a friend of yours said, "I have dysgraphia," you might wonder if they had like a skin condition, right? It's very like medical sounding and a little bit intimidating. Go ahead, Alex. I see there's maybe some more in there.
Yeah, the next term we have suggested is challenges.
Challenges. So I think you mean that these would be a person would be experiencing a lot of challenges if they got that diagnosis. Yes, and there's a lot of disorder, right? If you look at a syndrome, disorder, um, condition, I find to be a bit not great, but less negative, right? I'd rather have someone say that I'm navigating conditions versus a disease or a disorder. The other thing that is difficult here, oh, here, I see there might have been some more chat. Let's do that first and then I'll proceed.
Yeah, our next aligns with what you were just saying, deficit-based terms. With
Mhm.
our next one after that is a person might not know what that means for them or to them, not enough awareness of what these terms actually mean for them.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Thank you so much. All right. I got one more and then I'll proceed.
Sure, let's go with rigid as well,
Mm,
pathologized.
yes. Oh, thank you so much for all of, and I know many of you who aren't in reach of your chat buttons or whatever. That's okay. I'm sure you had some ideas, and you can think of how you or someone you love might feel if you were presented with this. Thank you so much, Alex, for reading those. So, a couple of things here that I'd like to add. One of them that I think is really difficult is, for example, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is what the official diagnosis is that I have. And of course, when I first heard about it, I thought that the autism spectrum disorder, the spectrum it's talking about is kind of like a spectrum of light or a spectrum of sound, or similar to, we'll say, the gender identity spectrum, right? But it's not that. The reason that it's using that in this way is that autism spectrum disorder, ASD or autism, presents differently in every single individual, and then it presents differently along cultural, ethnic, geographic, and age and gender lines. So you could have a family full of autists, and none of them would present the same way, but they would all be given this, if they got the formal assessment and diagnosis and hit the metrics, they would all be given this same diagnosis. So it's problematic in the very names for a number of reasons, right? And you'll hear people say like, "Oh, I wonder if you're on the spectrum." What they're saying is that they think you're neurodivergent, or if, "I wonder if I'm on the spectrum," they think they're neurodivergent, but it's not that kind of spectrum. I really hope they rename it. And of course, there are huge problems with the naming of things and the diagnosing and assessing and diagnosing of things as well. So, of course, I'm living proof of that. I'm a white female from a lower middle class family, and I didn't know until I was 51 that I have and always will be autistic. And by the way, if you or someone you love or someone who works for you has one of these quote unquote conditions, you're likely to have another one or two or possibly three. So I also found out at age 51 that I have and always will be dyslexic. You can imagine how difficult it has been for me, especially through my formal post-secondary education, not to mention my primary education. I got a Bachelor of Science and then went on to get a Master's of Library and Information Science. And reading is very effortful for me. I'm a librarian who doesn't love to read, and now I know a little bit more about why. So the heartbreaking thing about this isn't just the language, isn't just the medical model or the multiple barriers to getting this information, to getting the supports. It's also that there's a lot of social stigma that we then internalize. And when we try to say, this is what I have, this is what I'm dealing with, there's a lot of not being believed. Pretty much every day somebody says to me, but you don't look autistic. This is not only a very unhelpful thing to say, it's also a microaggression. Because on the rare occasion when I have said to that person, oh, really, what does an autistic person look like? It's not useful, it's a non-starter. So what they're really saying is that I'm functional, in quotes, and so quote unquote functional that they're surprised that someone would have said that that's what my brain does, the way that I navigate the world, the way I process information. But the tricky thing is that no one knows what's going on in anyone's mind. So you just have no idea how much invisible work there is on the back end, right? And it's exhausting. And it's very difficult to stay optimistic, to continually have those conversations around self-advocacy and to seek being believed. The other thing, which falls in the category of neurodiversity is not a superpower, is that if you've made it through all of this so far, and you're like, okay, I got this, I got a circle of care, and I can get information and I can get at these resources and supports for myself. What they don't tell you is that you're going to have lifelong, all of these conditions are lifelong. You're also going to have lifelong anxiety and depression. They go together, hand in hand. And because neurodivergent individuals are navigating a world that has a whole heck of a lot of neurotypical bias, male and white bias historically, and the medical model view of individuals, plus all of these disorders are saying that you or I are the outside cases. You're not the inside, right? So it's exclusionary by its very nature. So it's not terribly upbeat, right? I don't think that any parent out there would say, oh gosh, I hope that my child is beautiful and healthy and is autistic. I don't think it's a wish that anyone would have. However, there are some amazing gifts and strengths and talents that come from the very lived experience of this difficulty. So you get an incredible amount of creativity. You get an incredible ability to think outside the box. I like to tell people there is no box. And you get persistence and resilience that you may or may not find in another individual, regardless of their neurotype. So one more sad thing slides, and then we'll start our climb, our ascent. So I call this my sad slide. And the reason it's sad is because these statistics aren't very hopeful. They're not great. They're not anything that you or someone you love would wish upon themselves or someone else. However, I have to add the caveat, they're also low, right? So any of these statistics are low. And please feel free to add in the chat. We'll come to it later at the end. Any thoughts you have about these? I did include my sources, and anyone who's watching or participating in this webinar will have access to those at the close of the event. So why neurodiversity matters? 72% of HR professionals do not consider neurodiversity in their practices. Now, what you need to know is that that number is really low. I'm going to say it's closer to 98%. And this is in North America. What this means is from the job posting, the job description, the language of the job, the encouragement or discouragement or the bias in the very posting of the job, doesn't consider how to reach or recruit or speak to or make accessible the process to someone who's neurodivergent. Then when you are interviewing, that is again not included. The consideration or it's just not even a lens with which most HR professionals look through. And then on top of that, we know that anyone who's neurodivergent is going to have a real challenge coming across as authentic in their interview process because they're fraught with anxiety and stress about the very hurdles they have to overcome to succeed, which the chances of succeeding are quite low. Also, this one really just crushes me every time. Fewer than 1 in 6 autistic adults are employed full-time. Now, keep in mind that number is low. It should be greater. It is greater. We just don't have the stats, the measurable stats. And as an autistic adult, I can tell you that even though I have a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Library and Information Science, I've had great difficulty becoming employed full-time or staying employed full-time. And that's a big challenge for anyone who's neurodivergent. Adults with ADHD are 60% more likely to lose their job. Okay, again, a low number. Still, a shocking amount of sadness in these statistics. And young people with dyslexia experience unemployment at 3 times the average rate. So again, I do call this my sad slide. And it's important that we know that these are the realities. Actually, this is a low ball estimate of the realities that a lot of us face. And so if you or someone you love has felt like it's just an uphill climb and you have so much potential and you'd be so great at this job or with this company and you have your hopes dashed, please know that there's a lot going on and that it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It means we're literally navigating a world that was not designed for us. So this is where the accessibility and inclusion piece comes in. Okay. We're gonna start our climb up. I promise. Thank you for bearing with me. And I know a lot of this is just really hard on the heart. So this quote by Paul Collins really hit me hard when I first came across it. And it is, autists are the ultimate square pegs. And the problem with pounding a square peg into a round hole is not that the hammering is hard work. It's that you're destroying the peg. So this spoke very, very clearly to me, and I'm sure to many of you who've had that frustration or watched someone you love just constantly come up against barrier after barrier after barrier, knowing full well that they have gifts to bring and that they'd be just so powerful if given those opportunities. So that's what we're working toward today. And that's part of the reason why I started my own business, because I have, like every neurodivergent individual, struggled with maintaining sustainable employment in my adult life. So I'm creating it now and hoping to create it for other neurodivergent adults. Okay, so here we go. Now let's talk about some brighter things. How neurodiversity benefits organizations. Now, because we have a very mixed audience, I would like for you to know that you could substitute your company or your team or your church or your Rotary Club or even your family unit for organization here. So also I'd like to note that, for example, the first item is improved team productivity and performance. Please do not misinterpret these statistics, evidence-based points as saying that, for example, in order to have improved team productivity and performance, you need to have a completely neurodivergent team. That's not what this research is saying. What it's saying is that having one or two neurodivergent people mixed in with neurotypical people will lead to improved team productivity and performance. And the same caveat is true for the rest of these. Increased employee retention, greater employee engagement, increased organizational team and individual innovation, and greater highly qualified talent attraction. So for example, those of you in HR and those of you who run companies, a Glassdoor study in 2022 found that diversity, equity, and inclusion matters for the majority of employees and job seekers across age groups, but it matters more for younger employees, women, and people of color. So if you're in recruiting, or if you're wondering why you don't have the top productivity or the top engagement or top retention of your organization, this is the slide. This is your money slide. These are the things that you're going to get the moment that you start being inclusive and accessible to neurodivergent folks. And I love this quote by Barasha Medhi. The difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity is getting a dinner invitation. Inclusion is making sure everyone enjoys the meal. So for those of us with food allergies, food sensitivities, which are becoming more prevalent in our society as well, we especially understand this because we can go to someone's house, or we can go to a team building event or a holiday dinner, for example, and we can be polite, but we're going to end up hungry and feeling quietly resentful. So even something as simple as, let me know your food sensitivities, or here's the menu we're thinking of ahead of time, and allowing people to let you know. Because what the planner wants to eat and what the attendees want to eat are often really different. Okay, we are going to talk about 3 steps to increasing neurodiversity inclusion. And again, you can use this in your day-to-day lives, in your family units, in your companies, organizations, schools. This is something we can do all together, and we can do it right now without any money. So step 1, build psychological safety. Psychological safety is the required foundational piece of any diversity or inclusion efforts. We can't move forward without it. We can't have healthy relationships without it, and we can't move through difficulties without it. Psychological safety is basically the difference between a supervisor or a parent or a teacher saying, I have an open door policy, you can come and talk to me anytime, and having that feel true and be true, or having that just be a thing that's said. So we all know how that feels. Someone said we could come to them with a problem or a concern. We could raise our hand at a meeting. We could admit a mistake we made. We could ask a question or share an idea. And we've either experienced that psychological safety where they address that and they really consider that and then maybe act on it or not, but at least it's heard, or having it be something we get teased about, that we get rejected right out, or that we get told, basically, please hold your questions. That's not this kind of meeting, right? That's not this kind of project. So we have to build the psychological safety, and we have to experience it. If you're wondering if you have built psychological safety in your culture of your organization or your company or your church group, whatever it is, you can ask yourself, how frequently are people coming to me with really vulnerable and authentic conversations and feedback? And if it's pretty often, you're getting a gold star. If it's not very often, you can reach out to me and I can give you some ways to build that rapport and get you some resources that'll definitely go a long way toward building that foundation. So step 2 of increasing neurodiversity inclusion is curiosity and conversation. So just as we begin to dismantle bias of our own by investigating our own views, we can increase the awareness and the inclusion of neurodiversity by becoming curious about our own preferences and learning styles, communication styles, personas, and thought processes. So one example I have for you here is we're learning a lot now about, quote unquote, the way things have always been done probably isn't the best way to keep doing things. One example that's really simple is Most of us were taught to drive, and when we were taught to drive, we were told to put our hands in a certain place. And I know you can all just shout this out. Where are you supposed to put your hands on the steering wheel? Well, it was 10 and 2, but since the advent of airbags, it's now 9 and 3. Most people haven't changed where they hold their hands on the steering wheel. So it's everywhere. But looking at these things with curiosity and having conversations, starting the conversation, sticking with the conversation, and inviting the conversation. So, an invitation I would like to extend to all of you is to share the inner workings of your mind with a few trusted sources. Maybe this is a paid counselor or a clinician. Maybe this is a mentor or a family member or a partner or a friend. Then ask them to share with you how they uniquely see the world and process information. This builds bonds within our own brains and with others in our lives, regardless of the setting. And step 3 of increasing neurodiversity inclusion is flexibility and compassion. I'm going to highlight a few things on this list rather than read the whole slide, but I'm inviting everyone to investigate how flexible your current practices are regarding some of the following. So, for example, meeting structure and duration, back-to-back occurrences. We all seem to have gotten in a really bad habit of, well, we're meeting online, so we can end at noon and start a new meeting at noon. And then we can end at 1 and start a new meeting at 1. We haven't allowed ourselves or anyone else the opportunity to get a drink of water, to move our bodies, to go to the washroom, to grab a snack, to blink, to process, to have a moment to switch gears, and to tend to the 1,000 other things that are vying for our attention. I like to give a little tool. This is a little trick that I used when I was scheduling meetings and really working to create this spaciousness, even if it's a couple of moments. I'd like to invite you to think about yourself and anyone who needs to go to the meeting as being on a very high floor of a traditional office building, like in a busy metropolis. And imagining that you and everyone else in the meeting needs to go from that physical location all the way down the elevator to the street and then down the block to another typical tall office building and get in the elevator and come up to the floor and then come to the meeting room, so that you can start to think about like, oh gosh, you couldn't possibly make it with the back-to-back. Also, I'm going to challenge you, if you have 1 hour long meetings and you spend the first 10 minutes with chit chat and complaining about traffic or weather, you can stop having your meetings be an hour and push them to 45 minutes. Start on time and end on time as a matter of respect. Also, please stop requiring that people have their cameras on in Zoom meetings. For many of us here today, it's the first time you've been in an environment where you had the option. In fact, you didn't even have the option, but you're enjoying that refuge. And also, you may or may not want to disable the chat in your Zoom meetings. Really looking at the methods and frequency of digital communication. I have a number of people that I work with and that are friends of mine as well. And instead of sending one reply on an email, they'll send maybe 5, 6, 7 separate emails, each of them with a new thought. It's just very overwhelming and taxing for both parties. So maybe take the time to read the email. If you don't have time to respond, really digest it, don't do it right then. Just because it's easy and quote unquote free doesn't mean that it is actually easy and free on all sides. And looking at authentic connection opportunities. Do you actually have authentic connection opportunities in your group or organization? And the sensory experiences of the physical space are a real issue for those of us who are autistic. So that's definitely something you want to look at. So instead of asking your team members or saying, you can come talk to me anytime, ask them, what do you need to be successful in your role? Because really the difference between being successful and failing or feeling like you failed is a matter of support. It's a matter of access. When we listen and celebrate what is both common and different, we become wiser, more inclusive, and better as an organization. And this quote by Pat Waiters really helps us to see that we have so many things that are the same, and we have so many things that are different. And here we are having traveled this journey with so much information and so much to say, and yet we're almost at the end. So let's take this as a spark, as a start, the beginning of a conversation. And you can reach out to me anytime. And you're also going to be receiving a resource list that is professionally curated by this librarian that will help you find articles, websites, and books to really connect with and answer your questions. And whether you're watching this on the video or you're here now, whether you speak out or chat out or put your thing in the Q&A or not, or whether you email me or not, I know that you're fully engaging with this information and you're really pondering what this means for you and the people that you interact with. And I really deeply appreciate that from you today. And it is, again, my honor and privilege to spend this time. So thank you so much. I'm going to let Alex tell us some things, and I'm going to answer as best I can to those things.
Yeah, just get myself spotlit here again. Currently, we don't have anyone who has submitted any questions to the Q&A feature, but of
Well, then
course,
maybe let's have people put them in the chat, because maybe people aren't used to using the Q&A. So let's go ahead and use that, folks. Please feel free to put those in there. Thank you, Alex.
and just while we give everyone a moment to process, to conjure their questions as
Thank
well.
you.
Oh, actually, if anything, we do have our first question, and I
Go
don't
for
want to
it.
take away too much time from those. So our first question from Samantha, thank you, Samantha, is can you fall somewhere between ND and NT? So Janine, I'm going to let you absorb those acronyms to make sure that we're using the right terminology.
Oh, absolutely. So again, for those of us, and that's part of the reason why I included them. It's very tricky. I'm a big fan of unambiguous conversation and words. And so I wouldn't have named these things the way they are, because I feel that ND and NT sound too similar. So the question was, can you fall somewhere between quote unquote neurotypical and quote unquote neurodivergent? No. Basically, the thing of it is, if you're wondering or if you're thinking that this sounds like you, then you are. If you think you are, you probably are. So again, that goes back to being believed. And then, since I'm not a clinician, I don't diagnose people. However, I can absolutely steer you to resources if you share some of your experience with me. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to add my email. And I wouldn't share it with anyone else. Normally, after I do a webinar like this, I get somewhere between 17 and 35 emails of people asking very specific, very personal things. And I just want to invite you to do that. But overall, no, you're kind of either are or you aren't. And navigating which sort of flavor of neurodivergent you are, there are some big tells. So for example, for autism, the sensory piece is a big tell. Like I have trouble with fabrics and smells and lights and flavors. And I mean, it just goes on, sensitivities. Whereas if you're ADHD or ADD, you may really struggle with sort of personal admin, like managing a calendar. Maybe you only ever write your papers for college the night before. You have crippling procrastinism, which I also have, perfectionism, which causes procrastination. And you may never be able to show up on time, and you may regularly run out of gas or miss a flight. So those are the two sort of most asked about. I hope that helps, and please feel free to reach out. Absolutely. Here you go. I'm going to put my next slide here. Go ahead, Alex. Just go straight to the question.
Right on. Our next question is from Serena. Thanks, Serena. When the question comes up in a job application process of disability status, I often put, I do not wish to respond. Is it better to just state that you have a disability?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. Okay, so yes, I was cognizant of the fact that we had a bit of a late start and I didn't want to push overtime. So one of the barriers to getting those statistics to be accurate is truth in reporting, right? So the disclosure. So I would say, if you have a formal assessment and diagnosis of any type of disability, please do hit those metrics, because it doesn't go to the person who's looking at your application. It goes into like a HR consultancy metrics for reporting. So for example, I couldn't say I was disabled until I had the formal assessment and diagnosis. And now I do report it because I have it. So again, this circles back to that multiple barriers. If you have difficulty accessing or being believed or being truly diagnosed, right, by someone who's actually trained in spotting that and assessing that, then it's going to feed into not being able to report, to feed into not feeling the psychological safety, and then to not being seen, heard, and valued and part of the conversation. So thank you for asking that. That's a vital point.
Our next question is a similar one, but I wonder if you have any additional
Go for
insight.
it.
Is it okay to self-declare in your personal life, in your professional life?
Thank you so much. Is it okay? Sure it is. Sure it is. So as I say, if you think you are, you probably are. The difficulty, what I call the high cost of self-diagnosis, is that if we don't take the next steps and the financial investment in ourselves to seek out the formal assessment and diagnosis, then we don't get seen, heard, and valued. We don't get represented, and we don't allow ourselves to access the financial and other supports and resources that are only available to the folks who are formally diagnosed. For example, if you've got a child and you think that maybe they've got ADD, and you self-diagnose or self-identify them, they may be able to get some supports throughout their schooling when they're in primary education. But the moment they cross the bridge into the workplace or post-secondary education, they won't have access to any of that unless they have the formal diagnosis. So it really is an investment in getting those supports. And in Canada, thankfully, you can have access with the formal diagnosis of neurodiversity, the neurodivergent condition. You can have access to the disability tax credit. You can have access to the Canada Dental Plan, that's new. You can have access to the Registered Disability Savings Plan, as well as the Persons with Disabilities if you need it. So again, please feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to help you with this. It's part of what I do, but it's very important that if you are sort of moving further in your journey and you're thinking like, hey, this really sounds like me, please, please do reach out, take advantage of the resources that Alex will share with you that I curated for you, and feel free to ask me specific questions.
Excellent. We have a few more minutes. Maybe we can get through one or two more questions. So
Go for it.
our next question is from Tiago. Thank you, Tiago. Tiago asks, can you elaborate a little more on the use of cameras in online meetings? I feel like folks in leadership roles feel they somehow get a better sense of what's happening with cameras, but I'd say outside of leadership, 90% of folks I've spoken to feel it's detrimental. What are particular challenges neurodiverse folks face with the use of cameras?
Um, okay, great question, great call out. So it really comes down to personal preference. And for example, just so you know, I'm standing here at my standing desk looking at my screen and my camera, and I can't see any of you. So even if Alex hadn't configured the Zoom meeting in this particular panelist way, I wouldn't be looking at you when I present it. Now, I know that that's not usual, right? I'm very unconventional in pretty much everything I do. But I find this allows me to focus on my content. And as you may think also, it forces me to make my content actual stuff that you need to hear, right? So I can't have superfluous things. I can't have distracting things. And that's really not how most presentations are. And most Zoom meetings and most in-person meetings really aren't about the meeting content at all. So what I'm asking people to do is focus more on why you're meeting. And if you don't need a meeting, don't have a meeting. Email is beautiful for that. So the other piece of it is we need to shift the culture to acknowledge that we're all whole human beings living whole and complete lives. And especially whether you're in leadership or not, you might be in 6 or 8 or 10 Zoom meetings a day. It's exhausting. So having the camera on for me, for example, when I'm presenting, of course I have my camera on because a lot of people really take comfort in seeing me. Hi. But if I'm attending a meeting, 9 times out of 10, my camera's off. And I've been in environments where I was told that I couldn't take the class if I had my camera off until I got my formal assessment and diagnosis. And now it's an accommodation, which is ridiculous, right? We should all treat each other like adults who are not falling asleep or on their phone when they're in a presentation. So I think a lot of it is that trust and that curiosity and conversation and the psychological safety of not having fallout. One more question. Can you just read the question, Alex?
Let's see. We have some comments, but no other questions at the
No other
moment, unless
questions?
someone is going to sneak one in there.
Okay. I'm
Nope.
going to address something that Donna says. Thank you, Donna. Yes, one of the multiple barriers is not everyone has financial access to assessment and diagnosis. I want to let you know right now, this is a huge issue. In the United States, an adult can get an assessment for about $1,000 US. In Canada, an adult can get an assessment for about $4,000 Canadian, and your communities may have a 2 to 3 year wait list. However, had I known what I know now about what is available to me with that magic piece of paper, I would have put it on a credit card and paid it off as I was able, because it has been that much of a life changer and game changer, even just in my personal life. Even just knowing, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. I'm not a difficult woman, which is the message I've received my whole life. I'm not I am different, but I'm not difficult. I'm not bad. I'm not less than. So I really encourage people to pursue that however you're able, and you may be able to get some financial supports in order to pursue that. So I would say definitely, again, share the resources that I have shared with you through Alex. You'll get them soon. And please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would invite all of you to please, 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 if you feel comfortable. Normally, I allow folks to turn their cameras on and we just do a big wave goodbye. But I want to invite you just to put any comments you have at all in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and save the chat. And if I find anything in there that is actually a question, or it sounds like it's a pretty important need, I'm going to work with Alex to reach out to you, make sure you feel some support, because I really do care. And I know how tough it can be. Any other comments or questions you can put in the chat. And I just want to thank you so, so much for allowing me to be my own person and to share this information with you from a trusted source, and also to give you some encouragement. I think that you could make a long list of things that are wonderful about having a special brain and a big heart, which is what I always called my autistic mind and self. All right, Alex, to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Janine, for an incredible session. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. As Janine has mentioned, they prepared a list of resources, as well as the slides from today's presentation, which we'll be happy to provide to everyone who's registered for today's session shortly afterward. So please expect that to be sent to you from the IWSCC. Of course, if you want to learn more about the IWSCC and what we do, how we support veteran-owned and disabled-owned businesses across Canada, you can visit us at www.iwscc.ca. If you want to learn more about our guest educator, Jenine, the wonderful Jenine Lillian, you can visit them at www.janinelillian.com, and we'll provide links to those as well in our follow-ups for everyone. As well as reminders of the best ways to contact us by email or your preferred method. Again, just from the IWSCC, I know we're coming up a little short on time. Another big thank you to Janine for sharing your expertise and your personal experience today. I hope that everyone learned as much as I did. It's great to see such an engaged group. And I hope that you'll check out Janine, check out IWSCC for more great learning opportunities like this. I just hope you enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, your month, and your year. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you all so, so much. Have a wonderful day.